Welcome to Obsession Engineering. I'm at Alton Park for a Wirral 100 meeting. But this is not the start of the meeting, this is the end of the meeting, and I'm about to pack up and go home. There is a reason I haven't recorded much today, and that is that this club are quite strict that we're not allowed cameras on bikes, and I thought a race review without any racing was a little bit odd. So instead what I'm going to do is something a little bit different. I'm going to show you what I do after the race meeting. So I'm going to load up my van, and when I get home, I'm going to show you what I do to re-prep the bikes. There's even a few little bits I do before I even load the van up, and one of them is to polish my helmet. Because my helmet gets flies on it during the day, and it's a lot easier to get them off when they're still a little soft. While the bikes cool down, I also like to tidy my toolbox, because everybody likes a nice tidy box. I might seem quite chirpy because I actually am quite chirpy today, because mostly I love going motorbike racing. It is the best thing in the world ever. And I've gone faster today than I went when I was here a few weeks ago. Not by massive margins, but I've chipped away at it, and my pace is more consistent as well, and I'm smoother, and I'm just riding better. So that's excellent. So before I disappear home, I thought I'd even show you what's actually in the van, and this is near enough the bare essentials to go motorbike racing. So ignoring the engine, because I've actually picked that up for a fellow TT competitor, and if he beats me on that after I've refreshed it, we shall be having words. Right, so we've got at the back of the awning, back of the van even, is the awning, and I always put that by the back door because when you get to the meeting, especially if it's raining, that is the first thing you need out of the van, so it lives by the back door. Then there are jerry cans, which are now mostly empty, a track pump, foot pump thingy for inflating tyres, a fire extinguisher, which is ACU regulations, we have to have that. I happen to have two now, spare tire for the van, and it's almost legal. Right, what else is in the van? Stacks of spare wheels, which luckily today we've not needed any of, especially the wets. Right, then the accommodation for the night in the master suite is sleeping bags, and the big block of foam that's behind my spare leathers. Again, luckily, spare leathers were not needed. The most important thing, two motorbikes, one there, and one buried in there. And then at the front, there is a box with helmets on top. Underneath that is my box of tyre warmers. Underneath that is the generator, because it lives in the van all the time. And then there is a box of clothing, like boots, gloves, undersuits, spare knee sliders, that sort of thing. And then underneath those is a box with cleaning fluids are in the top box. BMW spares are in the second box. In the bottom box is random stuff. Nuts, bolts, spare chains, a drill, rivet gun, that sort of thing. And that is pretty much all you actually need to go motorbike racing. You don't actually need a motorhome. You don't need the world of stuff. What you need is some motorbikes and just enough stuff to run them for a weekend. So that's it. Van is loaded, which means I can go home, have myself a filthy, dirty takeaway to replenish the calories I've burnt today, and maybe even a couple of ciders, because I deserve it. It is Sunday morning and I'm back in my garage. I've decided to do this in the garage, not in the workshop, because then I'm not cluttering up the workshop with another one of my bikes. So it's only been a one-day meeting, and there's not that much to have to re-prep afterwards, but the routine is still the same. So I'm going to show you first what we're actually going to be using while we're doing the prep. The majority of the prep work is really checking and cleaning. So we've got a selection of fluids for cleaning. The brake cleaner, which I actually don't use for cleaning brakes anymore, is really good for taking sort of tyre rubber and chain lube bits off anything. The GT85 is really, really good for cleaning lots of things, especially wheels. And then we have some Motul Wash and Wax, which is like proper bike polish. The Shine and Go, which is silicone spray, and some chain lube, because we will be needing that again, because we've wiped some of the chain lube off with those, so we're going to need to put it back on with that. Then moving down here, I have gloves, because my hands will get dirty. This is my chain stretch measuring tool, and then I have a selection of hand tools, which I think is most of the stuff I need. All the toolbox is in the back of the van, so it's not the end of the world to go and get more. And then finally, we're going to need some blue roll, or some rag, or some cloth, or whatever. So that's pretty much what we need. It's not that much, because it shouldn't really be that much work. So best to actually get cracking and do some work, and the first thing to do is take all the bodywork off. And because this is relatively expensive race bodywork and it fits lovingly, the only tool I need to take all the bodywork off is a 4mm Allen key, because everything is on Zeus clips, which makes life really quick and easy. With the fairing off, I now have access to all the important bits I need to get to. At this stage, I don't need to take the tank cover, the tank, and the seat unit and bits off, because they're not sort of due any service work yet. Depending on mileage, I would check air filter. If it was a Kawasaki, I'd be taking the fuel pump out of it a bit more regularly, and then I'd have all of this off. And every now and again, I'll just take it off and check anyway, but at the moment, we don't need to do that, because it hasn't done that much mileage since it all got done last time. With the bodywork off, you can get in and actually check stuff. And round the bike, you can see little dabs of this. And this isn't paint. This is stuff called torque check. And it's sort of thicker than paint. And if anything were to move, if a bolt were to start coming undone or anything, this would actually crack. Whereas if you have paint, there's just two lines you're trying to line up, this will actually crack, so even the tiniest of movements you'll see. It isn't particularly essential to do in some stuff, but I like to go a little belt and braces, especially before we go to TT, so lots of the engine points have got torque check on them. If I go up here, my handlebar position bits has got torque check on, so that if a handlebar were to move, I would see it. It's nice and easy. So it's a good opportunity to just go round, have a look at everything, and just make sure nothing's bent or broken. I too tend to bend that frame bracket because I hit it with my knee all the time, so I can just tweak that back into position. Right, we'll move on to actually checking some real things. It's important to check your fluid levels. So I've taken the rad cap off, and down there, just sort of about there, is the water level. So that's happy enough. It is always worth checking your fluid levels. Because it's a race bike, it has only water in it. Now, BMW have been quite good, and there's not really anything ferrous in the water system, but if you had a Kawasaki or a Yamaha, there's quite a lot of ferrous material in the water system, so the water goes rusty quite quickly, and so every couple of meetings I'd probably just drain the water out and put fresh in it, because who wants rusty water going around the bike? It's not going to do anything any good. With the front wheel on a paddock stand, the bike is pretty much level, so it's a good time to check the oil level. Now, this had an oil and filter change just before the meeting that I've just done, so the oil is fairly fresh. It is just over half full. Now, BMWs always make more power if you have the oil right down here, but I'm a little bit too mechanically sympathetic to try and run up bikes low on oil, so I always run it sort of about halfway up the sight glass. Because I run Motul 300V fully synthetic oil and it's excellent quality, it means you don't have to change it as often. So I change my oil at about 500 miles. And I do the filter every other oil change. So an oil filter will do 1,000 miles, the oil does 500 miles. And having taken engines apart at the end of the season and checked them, I can tell you this is just tip-top. The most important thing on your bike is your brakes, because let's face it, if they don't work, you're in big trouble. So every meeting I'm going to take the brakes off, check the pads, clean the calipers, and just generally give them a bit of TLC. So a nice easy start, I'm going to undo the bolts and take the caliper off. And then I'm going to start laying stuff out on my sheet on the bench in the right order. So although it doesn't really matter where the bolts go, I'm just like to lay them out. So the top bolt will be there, the bottom bolt will be there, and then when I get the pads out, it'll be the outer pad this side, the inner pad that side. It will all make sense in a minute. So with the caliper off, I can just have a very quick look inside it, and I know straight away that they're not too dirty, but then it is only a one-day meeting, and it's Alton Park, which isn't too bad on brakes. So it's not too bad, but I am still going to go through the full ritual of cleaning. So the next thing to do is to take the pads out, and these ones are just held in with spring pressure, so a little bit of a flick with there, and that in a second will just pop out and I'll put it on the bench. So with the pads laid out on the bench, I can move on to the caliper. And if we look in here, I've just pumped the pistons out a little bit, being careful to pump them out fairly evenly. And you can see, even though it's only done one day of riding, there is still a bit of dirt in there. So the next thing to do is to get some GT85 and a toothbrush and give them a clean out. Now, I always used to use brake cleaner for cleaning brakes, because it's called brake cleaner for cleaning brakes. But I've done a little bit more talking and research, and a lot of people don't like using it, and Brembo actually tell you not to use it because it can damage the seals. So I'm using GT85, which should be a bit kinder. There is an argument of using just soapy water and airline to dry everything out, and then a little bit of brake fluid on the pistons so they slide in and out a bit easier. But if I'm honest, the GT85 just works really nice and easily, and it creates a bit less mess. Because I clean my calipers regularly, they don't take very long to do. So this is literally a couple of minutes, little wipe round with a toothbrush, little blast with the GT85 and a dry off with a rag, and they are minty mint. There is a little bit of a stone chip on that one, but it doesn't run when they seal, so it doesn't matter. So the next thing to do is very gently push the pistons back into the caliper to make sure they definitely move nice and easily. So that's one piston pushed back nice and easily. They should move really quite easily, but you want to do them quite slowly because you want the fluid to push back into the reservoir and not just pop the next pistons out, because then it gets a bit awkward. So nice and gently, bit of a squeeze. There we go, piston slides back into the caliper nice and easily. So I know that one's happy. Do it with that one. Then that last one at the top. Right, there we go. One set of clean pistons back in the caliper. Next thing to do is give the pads a little bit of a once over, then pop it all back together. So here we go, brake pad cleaning. And you can actually see the dust coming off the brake pads. And you can see there it's broken the glaze up quite nicely on that one, and it's got a load of the sort of residue and the brake dust and bits out of it. So it doesn't take too much again because it's done fairly regularly. That's pretty good. What I'll just do is blast that off with some brake cleaner to get rid of all the loose bits, and then pop it to the side to dry for a minute. That's all that needs. That can go back over there. Move on to the second one. So the pads are now clean. The caliper is nice and clean. But before I put it all back together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some GT85 on a piece of rag, and I'm going to clean the fork legs, and basically I'm going to have the towel wrapping around the back of the fork leg so it cleans the inside all the way down the chrome section here as well. Give it a rub around here and actually clean the bottom of the fork bottom, because that's one of my little pet things of, if this is clean, you can tell the bike's actually been maintained. Once you get loads of brake dust and dirt in here, then it's a real easy place to tell that somebody's not really looked after it. So I've wiped the flies and bits off the fork leg. I've cleaned behind the chrome by putting the rag round the back of it like you do with your towel down the back of your body. So we've cleaned down there, I've cleaned the fork bottom itself, I've popped the pads and bits back in and bolted the caliper back on. It is also a good opportunity to check there's no damage on the brake lines or anything like that. And then I best remember to actually pump the brake up. There we go, nice solid brake lever, so I'm happy with that. I actually bled these brakes up before the last meeting because I put new pads in it, and I decided at the same time we'll put fluid in it, so it had Motul RBF 700 in it and new pads, and there was certainly no brake fade during the weekend, so that was happy. Right, that's one side of the bike done. I better do with the caliper on the other side. That's caliper number 2 done. I've cleaned all the fork leg and bits, cleaned the potentiometer, and it's always a good chance to just go around and wobble everything and touch stuff and make sure nothing's coming loose. I've also been up, checked the steering damper, that's not coming loose, there's no oil weeping out of anything, the bolts are tight, everything's happy up there, a little bit of a wipe round up the yoke and stuff. I've also given the radiator guards a bit of a clean, just a bit of a wipe over, get any brake dust and bits off those, down the sides of the radiators. Basically what I'm just doing is going around, cleaning everything I can get to, because when you clean it, you touch it, you find out if anything's loose, you see if there's any damage to anything, if any brackets are cracked, that sort of thing. The eagle-eyed amongst you may notice that these are not BMW original brake calipers. When I bought the bike, or in fact when I bought my first BMW, trying to get another set of the HP forged BMW wheels was eye-wateringly expensive, so I actually managed to get a couple of sets of these Marchesini Superbike wheels off a Superbike team, including the big Brembo discs, for a fair bit less money than buying BMW HP wheels. So these are in effect my Superbike wheels. But the standard BMW calipers don't fit with these discs. So then I had to change the calipers, which wasn't the end of the world because the pads are actually cheaper in these and last longer than in the BMW calipers, so it's a bit of a win-win. They bolt straight on, it's an easy mod. There isn't actually really any braking advantage to these calipers over the standard original BMW ones. it just fits together properly. So next job is to go around and actually clean the front wheel. Normally what I'd do is I'd get these sort of industrial wet wipes like Wonder Wipes and stuff, and I'd go around the wheels with those, but I haven't actually got any with me, they're all in the workshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of rag, some GT85, and just wipe around the rim and into the spokes and bits, try not to get anything on the brake discs. And again, it's just a case of cleaning anything, you're moving stuff around, you're making sure wheel weights haven't fallen off, you'll be able to feel if the wheel bearings and bits are nice, and it's just checking for damage. That isn't damage, that's actually tyre soap, so ignore that bit. The next job on my list is to clean and inspect the chain. So what I'm going to do to this is I'm going to give it a liberal spray with GT85. I'm then going to get a rag on it and clean all the old chain lube off it, any dirt off it, so it'll leave it nice and clean. And then I'm going to check the stretch measurement on it before I dry it off and re-lube it. And while I'm here cleaning the chain, I'm also going to get in bit round the front sprocket and all around this area and clean any old chain lube off, because I have a real dislike of old chain lube stuck to motorbikes, but I like a lubed chain, which means I do spend quite a lot of my time cleaning. So after a liberal cleaning with some GT85 and a rag, the chain is nice and clean, it's got all the old chain lube and any dirt off it, and I've also gone around and just given the sprocket a bit of a wipe round. Admittedly I've missed that bit just there. The sprocket teeth are just beginning to wear on this sprocket, so it won't be doing a lot more mileage before that's changed. The next thing I'm going to do though is I'm actually going to check the stretch measurement on the chain. To check the stretch measurement on the chain, I'm using this Zabaki chain stretch measuring tool. So, bike is now in gear, and if I pull on the wheel a little bit, you see it just pulls the tension on the chain, and then if I slot that into a roller there, and just lower that down and put a tiny little bit of tension on it, but not very much, because that's not the deal. What it shouldn't do, on a race chain, it shouldn't go onto the little green marker down here. On the road chains they say it can go onto the green but not onto the red, but realistically once it sort of dropped onto the green, I'd be changing it. The last job to do on the chain is to actually re-lube it. So now that it's clean, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spin it by hand and spray my Motul chain lube into here. It wants to be on the inside of the rollers, and what you're realistically doing is you're lubing where the rollers run on the sprockets. So I'm just going to spray a little bit of chain lube down here, but it doesn't have to be masses. So not an excess of chain lube, just enough to get across the rollers, and obviously when they're actually rolling around they'll distribute even more. So that is the chain done. The next thing I'm going to do is clean around the wheel, which again would have been easier if I'd brought my wet wipes with me, but a bit of GT85 and a rag, clean all the old chain lube and all the dirt and old rubber and bits off the tyre, and gives it a chance to check around the rear wheel. So now I've done the front brakes, the chain, cleaned the wheels and had a general wipe round. And you might notice I had a treaded tyre on the front and a slick in the rear. And what I've been trying to do is run the bike on the setup I'll actually run at TT. And you might think it's a bit odd to run a mismatch of tyres, but there is logic to it. The fastest lap of the Isle of Man I've ever done was on a treaded front and a slick rear. And that happened because you don't really wear front tyres out around the Isle of Man, and the Superstock race in the middle of the week I'd put a new tyre in the front of the bike, and so I just left it in for the senior, but put a slick rear in because the rears do wear out quite a lot. And it was the fastest I ever went. So I had this epiphany that what I don't need to do is change the front tyre. So it keeps it more consistent during practice week and into race week that I've always got the same front tyre, or at least the same sort of, type of front tyre, and then I'll just change the rears to suit because the slick will do 6 laps better than the treaded tyre that we run in Superstock. So that is the reason for it. This is actually the 3-compound 270 rear tyre. So this is the big tyre. This is the tyre we'll be running at TT that should do 6 laps. And that is the D213 Superstock tyre that I'll be running. So that is the tyre setup I'll run at TT. And the more mileage I'll do on that, the more familiar I'll be. And hopefully, the faster I'll be. So I've cleaned the wheels, and I'm happy there's no movement in wheel bearings. Everything spins nice and freely. The brakes don't drag. I don't tend to clean the rear brake very much, because frankly, I just don't use it. That is almost for decoration as far as I'm concerned. Right, while I've been in there, I've got some GT85 on a rag, and I've just given a wipe over the exhaust pipe and over the downpipes and bits, and I'm just going down there, making sure we've not broken any springs, that there's no cracks or anything, that the lander probes aren't coming loose, I've checked the shock linkage, that everything's tight on there, and then I like to go around and just pull on the gear lever, on the foot pegs, the toe pegs, gear lever, all that sort of stuff, make sure everything's tight, and just generally go around, give the bike a little bit of a wipe, and give it a touch, and make sure nothing's coming off. I'm especially looking for things like if there's any little flecks of oil out of the oil filler, if there's anything coming loose on engine covers, and then you can wipe any brake dust and bits off it, and you're basically looking round it. In the words of a scrutineer I once met, if you haven't cleaned it, you haven't checked it. So now that I'm happy that the basic mechanics of the bike are happy and ready to go for next time out, I'm going to go and write all the settings down that I've used. Now I do actually log everything down during the weekend, but it's a good opportunity to go through and check all the settings on the forks and on the shock. Make sure you've got everything written down so that next time I go to Alton Park, I will know what settings I finish this time on, and then it gives me, like, you know, a step in the right direction. So I have all my settings logged down in my book. When I'm doing my sort of day job over at BSB spannering for Franco Born or whoever, then I actually have proper data setup sheets, but I'm sort of in the force of habit of just writing everything in the little pink book. This book is nearly full because it has several years worth of BMW data in it. The only thing I really need to do now on here is write down how much fuel we used in the race, so I can calculate how much fuel we use per lap at Alton Park, so that next time I've got references for everything. So to get my fuel out, I need a screwdriver to open the filler cap because I've taken the lock mechanism out. And with the cap open, I can get my sucker in, get that down the side of the fuel pump, and I can do a little pumpy and get all the fuel out of the bike. So I finished the race with almost dead on 3 litres of fuel, which is pretty much ideal. It's almost like we've done this sort of thing before. So I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with my fuel calculation that I'm using just over 0.7 of a litre a lap. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a sort of standard amount of fuel back in the bike so that next time I go to ride it, I know it's got fuel in it. So normally, for a session, we'd have about 8 litres of fuel in for a normal session. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put 10 litres in it, so we've got a little bit of spare in case we get an extra long session somewhere. You would think putting petrol in the bike would be easy, and it is especially easy if you have a big funnel and this one has a filter in it. Because I've run Kawasaki's quite a lot in the past and they have the easiest to block fuel filters in the world, it is always worth having a funnel with a filter in it. I've also trimmed a bit of the filler neck out of this BM so I can get the funnel in easier. So, filter the fuel in, then if there is any dirt you see it and you can pick it out. Easy as that. So I now have enough fuel in the bike for next time I ride it, and I'm also going to pump a couple of PSI extra into each tyre. Because these tyres are going to get used again, if I pump them up a little bit now, when I go to the circuit next time, I'll only have to take air out in preparation for a session, which is easier than faffing around in the morning when you might be in a rush, trying to pump tyres up. So with most of the mechanical jobs done, now I can put the bodywork back on. The bodywork is back on. What I've also done is I've gone round, wiped a little bit of brake cleaner around certain areas and then put a little bit of tape over certain fasteners. Now Zeus fasteners, by their nature, are sprung-loaded, so shouldn't vibrate out. But bolts that go into frame mountings and clock brackets and stuff like that, they tend to vibrate more because they're attached to the bit that vibrates. So if your bolts are going to fall out, it'll be the ones that are bolted to the frame, to the subframe, that sort of thing. So I tend to go around and tape certain bolts up. So the ones that go into the frame there, on the belly pan, up on the nose cone, and the ones in the back of the seat unit, I put a little bit of tape on because it's cheaper than constantly having to put new bolts in the bike. So now there is only really one thing left to do, and that's give it a coat of polish. So that's about it. The race bike is ready to go again. To go through the basics of what I've done again, I've checked and cleaned the brakes, made sure all the fluid levels are happy, cleaned and lubed the chain, checked the tyres, checked the wheel bearings, and basically gone through the whole bike and cleaned everything and touched it and fiddled with it and given stuff a pull, and just made sure nothing's coming loose, nothing's broken, nothing's sort of wearing out, and that I'm happy that it'll be good to go next time. I've also done a little bit of prep. I've put fuel in it, checked the suspension settings, and I'm happy that the bike is ready to ride. So I hope this has been useful to you, and join me again next time for some more motorbike fun.